Hello BookTube, it's Roz and we're off on a scallydandle today. We're going to the Pacific island nation of Fiji in the company of Paulini Turagabeci and her book The River. Now, as usual with the scallydandles, let's place Fiji in our heads. So, it's actually an archipelago. 300 more than 300 islands, 100 or so of them are generally inhabited, so sort of spread across a chunk of the Pacific Ocean. The nearest places that you might be familiar with are Tonga and Vanuatu, but to kind of link it to kind of bigger places that you probably can picture on the map. If you started in Fiji and you went down south 2,000 kilometres or so, you'd hit New Zealand. And if you went west, you'd hit kind of more or less the upper part of Australia. And if you went a very, very, very long way east, you'd hit Peru. So that kind of places it a bit on the map, doesn't it? What an interesting country as well. What a fascinating history. That's what I love about doing these scallydandles. I find out about places that I would never have known. And because Fiji is part of Melanesia, and so it was settled by Austronesians in the around sort of 3000 BC or so. They're not exactly sure when, and then the Melanesians follow several thousand years or so after that, some Polynesians as well, and of course they all had to come huge distances by sea. It's one of those great sort of untold human stories, isn't it? How people reached all these very spread out Pacific islands and established themselves there. So, and it eventually Europeans turn up and cause trouble as usual. Um, Fiji was not somewhere that sort of just kind of fell swiftly into being colonized, as it were. It actually, but eventually, you got sort of settlers, I suppose, who were going there to grow cotton or whatever, and then they gradually sort of wanted to take more control, and finally in 1874 it became a British colony. So, but it didn't just sort of fall into European hands just like that. They were around for a couple of hundred years before it happened, really. So, which is quite interesting, very different from some other countries where there's a sort of deliberate process, I suppose, of conquest. Um, I suppose being on lots of different islands has a sort of different impact, doesn't it? And also they're volcanic in origin, so quite often the interiors would be quite remote. Um, but Fiji is also, when you picture a gorgeous tropical island, if you're not from one, and you imagine those sort of white sand beaches and so yeah, it's a it's very beautiful, like that, as you might imagine. It's relatively developed in Pacific Island terms. One of the strange things that Fiji exports is water, bottled water. Yeah, you may have seen it. Yeah, I suppose because of being volcanic, it just seems a strange thing to export from a set of islands. There you go. So this book is written by Paulini Turagabeci and it was published in 2019. And she is a relatively young woman. Well, she's from my point of view, and she actually wrote the book when she had a small baby, and she used to write it between when he had his sort of spell of deepest sleep between 10 o'clock at night and 2 o'clock in the morning. Amazing. Did it in 3 months by just sort of knuckling down and doing it every. I don't know how she survived on so little sleep. There you go. But if you really want to do something, you make yourself do it, I suppose. And she's also, I think, a teacher, and but she describes herself as a mother first. Um, and she says that she wrote the book in part hoping to inspire other Fijians, particularly Fijian women, to don't become writers. She says it's not really a well-known or established kind of thing to be in Fiji. Not that there aren't people that write books, but that everyone would do it on the side with another occupation to really support themselves. And she consciously wanted to try and yeah encourage others to think, yeah, I could do that. Why not? And she seems like a really nice person who's written a really nice book. It's in English, which Fiji has three main languages. English, the sort of main Fijian tongue, which is Itaukai, and then uh, Fiji Hindi, because about a quarter of the population are of sort of Indian origin that was sort of brought there to work. Something we used to do, the British, wasn't it? When you're part of the British Empire, you just move a load of people from India to Fiji. Why not? That great sort of tradition of just moving people around to convenience your trade or your agriculture or whatever it is you wanted. Um, so, so the book is written in English, but it has quite a bit of Itauke and Fiji Hindi in it as well, which was a deliberate choice by Paulini to kind of introduce those words and dialect words from some of the, obviously, if you've got 100 inhabited islands, you also get kind of different dialects as well. So she says that she hopes when Fijians read the book, they will kind of recognize themselves, that they'll recognize places that she's writing about. They'll like the fact that it's in a mixture of English and Fijian and Fiji Hindi, and that's part of her aim. And she also says she's really hoping that perhaps visitors to Fiji might read the book and see that there's more to the place than those gorgeous beaches and warm seas, and see something of Fijian kind of life and culture, beyond the beach. And I think she achieves all that. To be fair to her, there's a lot to like about this book. Um, it's although it's fairly sort of, you would think it's quite straightforwardly written, but actually it's got quite an interesting non-linear structure. And she goes back and forth in time. She starts with the sort of big dramatic event, and then takes us to sort of key times in the childhood of one of the two main protagonists. But so I like that. You gradually build up the story in a non-linear fashion. Always a win for me. That I quite prefer that to just we'll plod through time, if you know what I mean. Another thing I really liked about the book is that the main protagonist is an old man, already retired, and getting quite elderly by the end of the story, as it were. I know it's non-linear, but still, what's the end point of the story. I if push comes to shove, if you ask me, would I rather read a book about a young person or an old person? I think old protagonists are probably my favourite, and you don't get enough of them, do you? I mean, it's so interesting when someone's got a kind of whole life of experience. We get so many kind of coming of age sort of books, don't we? And actually, there's something to be said for more looking back on a lifetime sort of books, like Penelope Lively's Moon Tiger. That's an example, isn't it? Or it's a good thing, I think. What else did I like about it? I like the fact that she builds a lot of the book around looking at the importance of family or clan in Fijian culture, and how that is a mix of sort of obligation and that in some ways can be quite claustrophobic or limiting, or that people might kick against it, but on the other hand is very cohesive and supportive and valuable, and that your extended family may come through for you at moments when life is difficult, and that rejecting that may be a mistake. I like that as a theme. Bereavement is another theme, and dealing with sort of childhood, um, life-threatening illness of a child. So, yeah, good themes to explore. What was not so great about the book, if I'm honest, is it's a bit sugary, I suppose, for me, a bit saccharine. It's kind of like that's what I mean about, Turabeki is obviously like a really nice person, and she's written a nice story about learning to be nice to each other there, and it's also quite explicitly Christian, um, I think, and as a non-Christian, non-believer, I I don't object to religion in books. In fact, on the contrary, I actually find books that kind of explore the kind of human impulse to religious belief and how religion kind of influences people's actions and helps them, yeah, yeah, maybe shapes their decisions and is important to them. Those are really good subjects for books, I think. But what I don't like is a book that's a bit kind of preachy, and this was just verging into the preachy end of things for me. So uh, that would be the downside. Nevertheless, I think as a book to discover about kind of Fijian life and culture, it was spot on, and I really enjoyed it. But I would have liked, and she does hint at some of the sort of strains in Fijian life, some of the um, uh, yes, particularly around the sort of the way the traditional family kind of culture works or doesn't work and how that's changing or not. And so it's not that she shies away from all sort of tougher issues, but yeah, a little bit too cuddly for Roz. In contrast with the other book that I read this week, which is also set on an island, and that's Annie John by Jamaica Kincaid. And this is, oh well, Jamaica Kincaid grew up in Antigua, and then emigrated as a 16-year-old to America, where she's lived since, and she was a journalist and author and so on, and feminist, quite political, interesting woman. And this book is a kind of coming of age story, um, set in Antigua in the sort of post-war sort of end of the 40s, 1950s sort of in period, and is quite, it's, I think we might, heaven forfend, we might call it autofiction now. It's kind of, it's like fictionalized autobiography. I mean, based on her life, but not literally. It is genuinely fictionalized. But what I liked about this book, and I won't do a sort of whole detailed sort of scallydandle type review of it, but what I liked is it's actually a really kind of abrasive book. This, quite harsh in a way in tone. It 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 looks at those family ties, and uh, kind of explores the fact that families aren't always nice, but also that even when your parents care about you and you care about them, you can end up, I don't know, really disliking each other. That in teenage years, mothers and daughters can become quite estranged without either of them really understanding why. And so there's a kind of emotional honesty about this book that perhaps the river didn't have. The river there's something slightly dishonest about its kind of, oh, we'll all come together and be nice to each other in the end, sort of happy ending sort of story. So this is probably a better book, but boy, I really appreciated the other one for taking me to Fiji.